The dawn of December 1814 broke with a pale, glass-like light, the kind that seemed almost reluctant to touch the earth. Frost clung to the brittle hedges surrounding Ashcombe Hall, turning each branch into a fragile sculpture. Within the aging estate, where the scent of cold stone lingered in every corridor, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe moved with controlled urgency, her breath quick and visible in the air. She had risen before the servants, before even the restless birds that usually claimed the morning, and now she slipped through the dim halls as though afraid the house might call out her name and stop her. Ashcombe Hall had once been a place of soft velvet, fine marble and cheerful gatherings. Now it resembled a fading portrait, still beautiful but drying at the edges. Eleanor often wondered if she, too, was becoming the same, a figure expected to smile politely as cracks formed beneath her composure. Her father's baronetcy, once respected, now stumbled under debts he refused to acknowledge. For him, there was only one solution left: securing Eleanor's future by binding her to the Earl of Winthorpe, a man nearly twice her age whose wealth flowed as steadily as his temper. To her father it was salvation. To Eleanor it was a sentence. She tightened the thin shawl around her shoulders as she crossed the courtyard. Beneath the wool layers she had hidden plain traveling garments, the most practical she owned, though practicality felt foreign to her upbringing. Every step echoed the same thought: this was her only chance. She would not be traded like a final bargaining chip. She would not spend her life beside a man whose voice made her skin crawl, whose smile never reached his eyes. Eleanor paused at the wrought iron gate, fingers trembling slightly as she reached to unlatch it. Then she froze. A horse stood just beyond the gate, its breath clouding in the icy air. Beside it, tall and still as a carved sentinel, was Alexander Hawthorne, Duke of Harland. His dark coat blended with the morning shadows, and his gloved hands rested lightly on the reins. What unsettled her more than his sudden presence was the expression he wore, calm, almost expectant, as though he had known she would be here at this very moment. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice barely above the hush of the winter wind. "What are you doing here?" Alexander stepped forward, the frost crunching beneath his polished boots. He was a man shaped by both privilege and discipline, broad-shouldered and striking, his countenance sharpened by the rigors of war. A faint scar traced the line of his temple, vanishing beneath the waves of his dark hair. His eyes, deep, steady, impossibly discerning, studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "I might ask you the same," he answered quietly, "though I suspect we both already understand the truth." Her throat tightened. She looked away, unwilling to meet the clarity in his gaze. "I must leave," she said, forcing steadiness. "I cannot remain here and accept a future that is not mine to want." "I know." His voice softened, yet carried a gravity she could not ignore. "And I will not allow you to face that future alone." The word struck her like a sudden warmth in the cold. She had known Alexander since childhood, heir to a dukedom so vast and fortified that it might as well have been another world. They had shared summers chasing sunlight across the meadows between their estates, before rank and responsibility divided their paths. After her mother died, he had been a rare comfort in her grief. Then he left for the Napoleonic campaigns, and the boy she had once considered a friend returned a man carved from duty, silence, and shadows. "You should not be involved," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "This is my burden, not yours. And if my father discovers—" "He already suspects," Alexander interrupted gently. "And that is precisely why I am here. If he believes you fled on your own, he will chase you. The Earl will chase you. The scandal will consume your name. But if you leave with me, the story changes." Her skepticism flickered. "Changes how?" Alexander drew a breath as though bracing himself. "There is a way to protect you. A way to protect your reputation, and perhaps even salvage your father's." His jaw tightened with something like hesitation, a rare sight from him. "I am hosting the Harland Christmas Ball tomorrow. It will be attended by half the influential families in England. If you arrive as my fiancée, temporarily only for the sake of appearances, no one will dare question your absence from Ashcombe Hall." Eleanor stared at him, stunned. Your fiancé? Alexander, that is unthinkable, he offered softly. She shook her head, struggling to gather her thoughts. Not unthinkable, only impossible. You are a duke. You cannot entangle yourself with my troubles, especially with something as serious as a false betrothal. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. I would not have suggested it if I did not believe it was necessary. You once told me that courage is sometimes nothing more than choosing the path that frightens us. I believe you stand at such a crossroads now. She remembered saying those very words to him years ago before he left to face the uncertainties of war. It unsettled her that he remembered too. And what, she asked, her voice barely a breath, do you gain from such a lie? Nothing, he replied without hesitation. But something faint, vulnerable, passed through his eyes, an emotion she could not decipher. Nothing, except the knowledge that you are safe. The world around them seemed to still. Eleanor felt her resolve wavering, not from fear but from the way Alexander looked at her, as though she were someone worth protecting at any cost. She had told herself for years that he viewed her only as a childhood acquaintance, a distant obligation. But standing here in the frostlit silence, she sensed there was more beneath his polished restraint, something he guarded fiercely. And if I refuse? She asked. Then I will escort you wherever you choose to go, he said. But I promise you this, running alone will not grant you freedom. It will only grant your pursuers a head start. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, hearing the truth in his words. Her choices were few, her time even fewer. And Alexander, quiet, steady, resolute Alexander, was offering not a command but a lifeline. She opened her eyes. Very well. I will go with you. Relief softened his features, though only slightly. He extended his hand to her. Then let us begin. As she placed her trembling fingers in his, the iron gate swung open with a low groan, as though mourning the life she was leaving behind. She mounted the horse behind him, and together they rode into the pale morning light, leaving the fading shadows of Ashcombe Hall shrinking behind them. Yet even as the wind stung her cheeks and the road stretched uncertainly ahead, Eleanor sensed that her escape was no longer simply hers. Something had shifted the moment she saw Alexander waiting at the gate, something unspoken, deep, and destined to unravel everything she believed she understood about duty, desire, and the man she had trusted since childhood. And somewhere within her rising unease, a quiet spark of hope began to flicker. Harland Hall rose from the snowy landscape like a fortress carved from winter itself, its towering windows shimmering with candlelight as Eleanor crossed the threshold beside Alexander. The entry hall, vast enough to swallow Ashcombe Hall whole, hummed with restrained chaos. Servants hurried across marble floors, garlands of evergreen brushed the gilded cornices, and the scent of pine mingled with beeswax in distant kitchens preparing banquets for the approaching Christmas ball. Eleanor felt the weight of it all, its grandeur, its expectations, its scrutiny, settle over her like a cloak she had not chosen but had no choice now but to wear. Alexander removed his gloves with precise movements, his face composed though she sensed tension beneath the smooth veneer. He had barely spoken during the journey, his silence not cold but contemplative, as though calculating a series of invisible dangers. Now, in the center of his world, he appeared at once more powerful and more burdened. The Duke of Harland was not merely a title, it was a responsibility that wrapped itself around him like armor. Eleanor took in the hall, trying not to appear overwhelmed. She had known wealth, but this was affluence sharpened into discipline. Even the servants seemed to step in time with Alexander's presence. She wondered if this was the life he expected to resume, untouched by the grief and violence of war, a life she now threatened to disturb with her own turmoil. Lady Eleanor, came a gentle voice from the staircase. A woman in her middle years descended with graceful efficiency. Her posture was straight, her bun immaculately pinned, and her expression one of respectful curiosity. I am Mrs. Crestwood, the housekeeper. His Grace instructed me to prepare a chamber for you adjoining the Duchess' suite. If anything is lacking you need only ask. Eleanor nodded, trying to match the polished civility expected of a duke's supposed fiancée. Thank you, Mrs. Crestwood. I appreciate your kindness. The housekeeper's eyes flickered briefly toward Alexander, as though seeking confirmation of what she had already heard whispered among the staff. When he offered a faint nod, she curtsied and led Eleanor toward the sweeping staircase. Before following, Alexander touched Eleanor's elbow lightly. "Your arrival will stir questions," he said quietly. "We must present unity from the start. Harland Hall is full of ears. And eyes, I imagine," she replied, attempting a small smile. "Indeed." His voice softened a degree. "Do not let them intimidate you." She wished she could borrow even a sliver of his calm. In the chamber prepared for her, Eleanor found a gown laid out on the bed, emerald silk, elegant but understated. Mrs. Crestwood explained that the seamstress had worked through the night to prepare it once word reached the staff that Harland's master was returning with a betrothed. Eleanor's breath caught. The lie had already become a living thing, circulating through halls, shaping expectations she scarcely understood. As the housekeeper departed, Eleanor touched the gown's sleeve and felt a chill of unease. She could not help but wonder how easily a falsehood could become a trap. When they reconvened for supper in one of the smaller dining rooms, Alexander dismissed most of the servants, explaining that Eleanor needed privacy to understand what awaited her. He sat across the polished mahogany table, the candlelight revealing the exhaustion etched faintly around his eyes. "You must know," he began, "that tomorrow's ball is more than a celebration. It is a political theater. Every alliance, every rivalry, every ambition will converge beneath one roof. And our engagement will sit at the center of it," Eleanor said, steadying her voice. "Yes." He folded his hands together. "Many will accept it without question. Others will search for weaknesses. They will observe the tilt of your chin, the distance between us, the way your gaze follows mine, or does not. To them, love is not a sentiment. It is evidence." Eleanor absorbed his words carefully. "So you wish me to act convincingly." "I wish you to be safe," he corrected. His gaze lingered on her face, something unspoken flickering there. "The Earl of Winthorpe is not a man who surrenders easily. If he attempts to confront you publicly, you must remain near me. My title provides a shield. Yours at present does not." She inhaled slowly, feeling the reality of her situation tighten around her. "And what of my father? Will he be present?" "He will. He sent word this afternoon." Alexander's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "He believes he can reason with me. He is mistaken." The idea of her father stepping into Harland Hall tightened her chest. "He will be furious." "Let him be," Alexander replied. "He has used your obedience as a crutch for too long." Eleanor bowed her head, unsure whether the heat rising behind her eyes was anger or gratitude. She had been raised to obey, to accommodate, to maintain peace in the fragile remnants of Ashcombe Hall. But here, in the Duke's presence, she felt something shift, an unfamiliar but exhilarating hunger for selfhood. After the meal, Alexander led her to an empty ballroom, its crystal chandeliers unlit, its marble floors gleaming faintly with reflected moonlight. The stillness of the room magnified his voice as he said, "There is one more matter you must understand." Eleanor waited. "To convince the guests," he continued, "we must dance together. Familiarity must be evident. Grace and ease, not stiffness." Her breath caught slightly. "You wish to rehearse?" He stepped toward her, offering his hand. "Only if you consent." His tone, though formal, carried a thread of gentleness that disarmed her resistance. Eleanor placed her hand in his and felt a quiet shock travel up her arm. His touch was steady, almost cautious, as though he feared revealing more than he intended. They moved across the ballroom with unpracticed rhythm at first, her steps uncertain, his controlled. Slowly she felt herself aligning with his pace, her breathing sinking to his. Their proximity was intoxicating, not for its scandal but for its unfamiliar tenderness. Alexander's gaze remained on her face, unblinking and unreadable, yet she sensed something fragile stirring beneath his composure. When the dance slowed, he released her gently but did not step back immediately. "You learn quickly. You lead clearly," she whispered. A faint warmth flickered in his expression, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. One more thing, Eleanor. Her name in his voice struck her nearly as hard as the words that followed. There is a condition to this arrangement, he said. One I failed to mention earlier. Her pulse quickened. What condition? That you do not fall in love with me. The silence that followed was sharp as winter air. Eleanor stared at him, stunned not by arrogance but by the painful sincerity in his eyes. Why would you say such a thing? She asked softly. Because this must remain temporary, he replied. You deserve a life unshadowed by my scars or my burdens. I cannot offer more than protection. And I will not take more than your trust. His words felt like a door closing even as he held her hand in his. Eleanor nodded slowly, though her heart twisted at the quiet tragedy of the condition. I understand, she said. But she was not certain she truly did. Alexander stepped back, allowing space to settle between them. Tomorrow will test us both. Eleanor exhaled, her resolve hardening. Then we face it together. His eyes softened, not with triumph but with something like fear. She sensed he wanted to speak again, but instead he bowed his head. And just as she turned to leave the ballroom, she felt it. The fragile suspicion that his forbidden condition hid a truth far more dangerous than he was willing to admit. Snow drifted in slow spirals outside the towering windows of Harland Hall as the night of the Christmas ball began. The orchestra tuned their strings beneath crystal chandeliers, and guests in shimmering attire swept through the grand foyer like a tide of color and anticipation. Eleanor stood at the top of the staircase, her fingers gripping the banister as she watched the gathering throng. The emerald gown Alexander had chosen for her glowed softly beneath the candlelight, its modest elegance emphasizing her natural poise rather than concealing her behind ostentation. Yet her heartbeat thrummed with unease. Every face below represented judgment, curiosity, or danger. Alexander appeared beside her, his presence so steady and commanding that she felt her breath ease despite herself. He extended an arm in silent invitation. She placed her hand upon his sleeve, aware of the murmurs rising as the crowd recognized the pair of them. The Duke of Harland almost never entered a ballroom accompanied. Tonight, he descended with a woman at his side, and the room responded with electric speculation. They reached the center of the marble floor just as the orchestra launched into the opening waltz. Alexander turned to her, his expression carefully blank, though she sensed the tension coiling beneath. Are you ready? He asked. As ready as one can be, she replied, attempting a faint smile. He drew her into position, guiding her with precise confidence. The moment their hands aligned, the air around them shifted. Conversations dimmed to murmurs. Then, as though choreographed with the music itself, they began to dance. Their steps found rhythm almost immediately, gliding with practiced grace though they had rehearsed only once. Alexander held her not possessively, but with a reverence that startled her. Every movement was deliberate, protective, impossibly tender. And when he looked down at her, the world sharpened into a clarity she could not escape. His eyes, usually disciplined into calm neutrality, glimmered with something dangerously close to longing. Guests watched with a collective breath, their whispers rising like a current. The Duke had never waltzed with such unguarded focus. It was a revelation that startled everyone, perhaps no one more than Eleanor herself. When the final notes faded, a ripple of applause broke through the ballroom. Alexander released her only slightly, his hand lingering at her waist as though he had forgotten his own rule. For a suspended moment, it seemed he might speak words left buried since childhood. But then a cold, familiar voice cut sharply through the crowd. Lady Eleanor. Her father materialized between the clusters of onlookers, his face taut with fury barely concealed beneath polite pretense. The Earl of Winthorpe stood beside him, his expression darkened by entitlement and irritation. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her cheeks. Alexander stepped forward, placing himself subtly between her and her father. Sir Reginald, he greeted with impeccable calm, I trust you are enjoying the festivities. I am not. Her father's voice trembled with barely suppressed outrage. Nor am I inclined to pretend otherwise. You have taken my daughter from my home without explanation. Your daughter sought my protection, Alexander replied, measured and unyielding. I provided it. You provided scandal, the Earl spat. Do you expect society to believe this sudden engagement? It is transparent fabrication. Alexander's gaze sharpened. I expect society to concern itself with facts, not assumptions. And the fact, the Earl said stepping forward, is that Lady Eleanor is promised to me. No, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. I was never promised. I was trapped. A shocked murmur rippled through the nearest guests. Her father's face reddened. Eleanor, do not disgrace your family. You will return with us at once. Before she could answer, Alexander spoke, voice low but resonant. She will not. The tension in the ballroom thickened, a clash of wills illuminated by candlelight. Eleanor sensed the precariousness of the moment. Her father was not merely angry, he was desperate. The Earl was humiliated, a condition he handled poorly. And Alexander, despite the authority of his title, stood alone in choosing her. To protect him, she stepped forward until she stood fully at his side. I will not leave with you, she told her father. Not tonight, not ever. Her father's eyes glimmered with something like disbelief. The Earl recoiled as though struck. Alexander inhaled quietly, and she sensed the fragile restraint there, a simmering emotion he had spent years suppressing. The Earl turned toward the crowd, raising his voice. Is this what the Duke of Harlan supports? A false engagement? A charade designed to shield a runaway woman from her obligations? Whispers swelled dangerously. Some guests seemed eager for spectacle, others watched with wary calculation. Eleanor's heart hammered. The lie had stretched thin enough to snap. Alexander stepped beside her, his posture straightening with decisive clarity. There is no falsehood, he declared, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Eleanor is under my protection by her own choice. Any man who attempts to coerce her, whether by wealth, pressure, or force, will answer to me. Her father sputtered with indignation. You speak as though you have a right to her. The words struck something deep within Alexander. He exhaled slowly as though releasing the final barrier of restraint. I do, he said. Because I asked her to be mine. The room quieted to utter stillness. But you placed a condition, Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling. One you never explained. Tell them the truth, Alexander. Tell me the truth. He looked at her then, truly looked, his eyes no longer guarded. The condition was a lie, he said, voice barely steady. I told you not to fall in love with me because I feared the consequences if you did. I feared what it would mean for you becoming bound to a man who carries more scars than he can name. And I feared what it would mean for me to want what I did not deserve. Her breath caught, a shock of emotion sweeping through her. You believed I could not choose you freely. I believed, he whispered, that I had no right to hope you might. The room faded, the crowd dissolving into insignificance. Only Alexander's voice remained, fragile yet fierce. I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you since the years when such affection felt foolish. Since long before war carved me into someone unworthy of you. I asked for a false engagement because it was the only way to keep you safe. I withheld my truth because I feared it would bind you to a life you did not want. She stepped closer, ignoring her father's outraged gasp. And if I choose it? She asked. If I choose you knowing all you fear and all you are? His breath faltered. Then I would spend my life ensuring you never regretted it. Emotion surged in her chest, relief, longing, and the fierce clarity of a woman finally claiming her own destiny. She reached for his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it felt like the quiet beginning of a long-awaited truth. I choose you, she said simply. Gasps scattered through the room. Her father lowered his gaze, defeated. The Earl stepped back, silenced by the force of a truth he could not challenge. And Alexander, his composure breaking at last, lifted Eleanor's hand to his lips in a gesture so gentle it silenced the last of the whispers. Snow drifted lightly against the windows, and for the first time since the plan began, Eleanor felt no weight of pretense. Only certainty. Yet deep within the quiet triumph of the moment, one truth remained. Choosing love was only the beginning. The consequences, political, personal, and perilous, would unfold with the dawn.